Hey, this is Andrew Versa with Impact Soundworks, and in this video, we're going to have some fun because I'm going to show you how to create your own virtual instrument. Now, of course, this could be a masterclass level topic, more about that in the video description, but we can start small and we can start simple, and I have just the thing for this video. This is my kid's xylophone, and we're going to see what kind of interesting sounds we can get from it. The first step, of course, to making a virtual instrument is picking something to sample, something that has an interesting sound, or if you have a way of playing it that's unique, or an interesting space. In this case, we kind of have none of the above, but we can still get interesting sounds from it. Now, because I want to make this as streamlined as possible, I'm just going to use this mic here, single mono mic. There are many ways to go more in depth, but this is just to show that you can simply use what you have. So we have our mic set up, we have our instrument, we have something to play it with, and we're just going to record. Now, this is a little unorthodox, but we'll make it work. That high C really doesn't ring out much. We could try a different mallet of some kind. We could use something lighter like this. Doesn't work too well. We could try a spatula, see if that resonates more or less. And then maybe we could do a little textural thing like this. Now, you might not think that sounds particularly amazing, but let's dive in and see what we can do with it. Okay, so here we are in my audio editor of choice. This is called Reaper. I'm using an older version just because I'm more comfortable with it. Anyway, this is what I just recorded on video. So this was my voice as well as the xylophone. Let's start by cutting out the sample performances. So I'm gonna go ahead and move this stuff over here. And then we had some light, pretty quiet hits. Move those aside. We had some other ones here. And then we had those glissandos, right? Okay, the first step in sample editing and production is doing any denoising. Now, I don't think the noise was too bad here, but we won't know that for sure until we take a closer listen. So I'm going to normalize the audio, which means bring it as close to clipping as possible. And we'll just listen and see, does it really sound noisy? Not too bad, but I think we can do a little bit of denoising. By holding Shift and pressing up, we can zoom in on the waveform and see how bad the noise floor really is. And we can just take a section that seems relatively quiet, right? Right about here. And then what I'm going to do is put on a denoiser. Let's see, denoise, spectral denoise. There are free tools that do the same thing. You can do this in Audacity, for example, but here I'm going to use Isotope RX8. And then essentially what we do is we play back this silence in a loop. And what it does is it captures the spectral footprint of the noise, the background noise. And now when I play the track back, it is applying reduction to that noise. So now that is going to be much cleaner overall. Let's go back to our first set of recordings. So that first hit wasn't very good. We can get rid of that. We've got 4 to start with. In fact, let's just focus on these 4. And then later on, actually, this one sounds even better. I'm going to go ahead and delete the first few, and that leaves us with these 4 hits. Okay, well, now we need to cut the samples, and they need to be consistent. I'll show you what I mean. We can't have something like this, where one sample has just a little bit of attack, and then the next sample has a lot of attack, because then if you were playing these on a keyboard one after another, there's a big gap in the timing. So what I recommend is to pick an amount of attack time that seems reasonable. So here, we can see in that little pop-up, this is about 5-ish milliseconds. Anyway, right about there. Okay. And now we're going to make sure that everything else has about the same amount of attack. Yeah, so about 5. I'm starting to see this visually, like maybe that needs to be more like that. That's in the ballpark. We don't need to get super precise yet. We just want to make sure we're in the general vicinity of where we need to be. So now I've cut 4 of the samples, and we can look at them stacked like this to see if they're correct. Okay, so some of these are longer than others, so we'll just line them up. Now imagine for a library like Tokyo Scoring Strings, you're doing something like this only on a much, much bigger scale. I think I like that. Next, what we're going to do is make a little bit of a fade so we don't get a click. And then I'm going to normalize these samples. So let's zoom back out, normalize. Great. And then they have tails that are pretty long. We probably don't need them to be that long. In fact, if we zoom in again, you can see it's mostly just noise at this point. So I'm gonna go ahead and do something like this. Just make sure they're a little bit tighter. And then because we have our denoiser on the first track, let's make sure they're all on the first track. Let's play it back. Okay, these 4 samples, humble as they may be, are a pretty good starting point. But let's see, we did do some other articulations, right? We used that little stick. Now look at the background waveform here. You see how much noisier this is? Because that articulation, that mallet was much quieter, the signal, in other words, the tone from the xylophone, is very, very quiet. And so when we normalize it, the background noise, like there's a leaf blower outside, there's the fans on my computer, that background noise seems a lot louder in comparison. So that's not good. But I have an idea. What I would like to do, because we only recorded in mono, let's see if we can make these samples stereo. We did do multiple takes, right? So I can take these samples, which are not exactly the same as the first samples, and I can put them on another track. Let's do it like this. We have a parent track. So the parent track has the noise removal on it. And then we're gonna call this left. We'll call this one right. And I flubbed that one. Okay. So if we do something like this, and then we pan left and right. Now I haven't done I'll just do sort of rough cuts for now, just to get things generally where we want them to be. It's not going to be perfect, but just to get it roughly in the right place. And let's just get the attack timing lined up. So that looks pretty good. Give it a little fade. Line this up here, line this up. It's almost like a puzzle, right? You're kind of fitting and syncing up things together. This is, by the way, a sort of an unorthodox way of doing things. Normally you would use 2 mics to get left and right positions. In some cases, we use as many as a dozen mics to get different perspectives all around the room. For the sake of simplicity here, I just used 1 mic and then we recorded multiple times. Now, if I play this back, we should hear kind of stereo effect. Not bad, right? So we have the first 4 samples of our virtual instrument edited and ready to go, at least for our version 1, right? The next thing is we need to name and organize these files so we can actually use them in something else. So what I'm going to do is we'll select these 4 items in Reaper, and there's a handy action. You can always pause the video if you want to see this, but it's called Insert Region for each selected item. Boom. These regions can now be used to name this sample here. So I could call this, for example, AA xylophone, and I think this is like C5. I think that's the pitch. Okay. We can edit the next region. Now, of course, there are shortcuts for doing this. I can copy and paste this. So we did E5 next. So now we have our 4 regions, and we can export these samples. And let's go to, how about F? Impact Soundworks Development, AA xylophone. What's handy about Reaper is we can do a few things. We can go to the region matrix. We could, for example, get 8 samples, 4 on the left and 4 on the right, but we don't really want to do that. We want to get 4 stereo samples. I'm going to select 1, 2, 3, 4. And then for the file name, I'll type in region, and you can even get a preview by clicking here. Okay, these are going to be our file names that come out of it. C5, E5, G5, C6. I'm going to set this to render, and then we're going to switch into Contact next to see what we can do with these samples. Okay, now we're in the patch creation phase of the process. We've got our 4 wonderful samples. Seems pretty good. Now I'm using Contact here because it's what we use in Impact Soundworks. It's the industry standard sampler, but these techniques apply to, for example, Logic Sampler, EXS24, and you can even create your own free sound fonts using something called Polyphone. The same principles will apply here as well, but just for the sake of simplicity, let's stick to Contact. I'm gonna drag in a sample, and let's just see what happens. All I have done is I've dragged in the first sample. Cool, right? So it's playing back that one sample, it's stretching it across the keyboard so we can hear it at multiple pitches. But because we recorded more than one, I'm gonna set the root note to C5. And then for now, I'm gonna set the range of it to just C5. So if I play C5, I'll hear it. And if I play anywhere else, I won't. Because you can see in this mapping editor, there's nothing else mapped. It's just C5. So I'll drag in C6 onto C6, E5 onto E5, just like putting together a Lego, and G5. And now when I play, we now have everything just like I recorded it. But we need to fill in the gaps. So let's zoom in a little bit. And again, these principles are the same for basically any sampler. We could drag this pitch up and this one down and up and down, up 2, down 2, drag this one out, drag this one down. Cool. All right. So what we've done is we've stretched these samples across the entire keyboard so that any pitches we didn't record, we can still hear them when we play the note. Now, a couple notes about this. In a perfect world, when you're sampling an instrument, you would play every single note. And I could have done that here, but just for time's sake, I only did 4 pitches. Sometimes you have an instrument where something is out of tune, right? And then we can stretch it to get the F. For things like the human voice, you really want it to be as chromatic as possible. You want to really record every single pitch, because when you pitch shift and stretch a human voice, it sounds very wrong very quickly. On the other hand, something like a guitar or violin, you can get away with a little bit of stretching, because if you think about it, if you recorded every other note, C, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, C. There are 12 notes in an octave, but we can just record 6 of them. By doing that, we cut our recording time and potentially our entire project expense in half. So that's a major consideration. Is it worth recording every individual single note, or can we get away with every other note? And with some pitched instruments, like for example, if you're resampling a synthesizer, you can get away with minor thirds like this. And you would be surprised at how good that sounds and how seamless it sounds, because pitch shifting a synth, especially like a very plain waveform, often sounds way better than pitch shifting an acoustic instrument. But anyway, let's get back to our patch. We've created a xylophone patch. It's not particularly interesting. It doesn't sound half bad. And you can hear I'm actually playing way below what we sampled. I just think that's nice to be able to do that. There's a few things we can do to start making this more interesting. The first thing to make it more playable is let's increase the release time so that when we play a note, it rings out. If we make this short, we'll get very staccato notes when I lift up my finger from the key. In some cases, that's desirable. Here, we really want it to ring out. What if we increase the attack time? Now that starts to change the character of the sound, doesn't it? And here, I think, is an excellent place to start using some effects. Now within Kontakt, you can start using effects, or you could do it in your DAW. But just to show how we could make this a very customized patch, we can start doing it right within Kontakt. So I'm gonna go ahead and add a reverb to it, and let's start playing with this reverb. Sounds very icy, doesn't it? Let's try some delay as well. Maybe let's use the legacy delay. Replica can be pretty intensive on the CPU. We'll sync this to maybe an 8th note. Now, can you believe that that came from this toy instrument, right? We're already getting into much more interesting territory. We can go further. Let's look at maybe some kind of chorus or modulation. And we could put this before the delay, after the reverb, and see how that sounds. Now maybe I decide that I want the attack back and hear how that sounds with the reverb and delay and chorusing we've added. But wait a second, I didn't record any dynamics, did I? I could have played that at different dynamics, but let's say I ran out of time, I ran out of budget, but I want to simulate that. In Kontakt, by default, it assigns velocity to volume. So if I play quietly, it sounds softer than if I play harder. By default, this slider, this modulation of velocity to volume, we can make that effect more pronounced. And we can make other things depend on velocity. So let's try this. Let's add a filter, maybe a low pass filter like SVLP2. Like that sounds pretty muffled, right? What if we then right click and assign this to velocity as well? You see that little orange light? That's showing the velocity that I played at and how this is adding to the filter cutoff. Now I might decide maybe I want to hear more of the filter modulation on the cutoff, less of the volume, less delay. We can really play with this endlessly, right? Maybe I want it to get even brighter, because if I play in these low frequencies, we're pitch shifting the xylophone, and so we lose some of those natural high frequencies. Well, we could just bring them back with an EQ. So what if we have something like this, and we make this EQ gain also attached to velocity? So now this can get even brighter. We can reduce how pronounced that is. So these are the kinds of ways you can think about creating a patch for your own virtual instrument. Now, I don't want to get into things like scripting yet or creating an interface, because I think that the most valuable thing here is creating a sound that's inspiring for you. You can see how quickly this one sound came together. I mean, less than half an hour, I've created a playable patch. This might fit perfectly into my song. If I were trying to make this into an instrument that we were to sell at Impact Soundworks, I might want to think about, oh, we don't want to have reverb on by default, or not delay, or we want to make that filter modulation controllable. Don't worry about that kind of thing, because if you're using it just for yourself, you can make the settings whatever works for you. Let's try one other thing. This is kind of an old school technique. I'm going to go and I'm going to select this waveform, and we're going to loop it and turn this into a pad. Our start point is going to be what it was before, but we're going to create a loop. So we're going to start the loop here, and then we want it to be, it's going to have to be pretty short, otherwise it's not going to work. So watch what happens when I do this with a crossfade. It's probably not going to sound particularly good yet. Let's try it. Okay, not bad. This is better because this sounds like an actual sustaining resonant bell or something like that. Why do we even need that attack at all? Why don't we just skip past the attack by moving this sample start time? And then let's turn up the attack on the instrument. And now we have our very own glassy pad that we created. All of that from this. This is why I love creating virtual instruments so much, because you can get so much mileage out of the simplest little sound. Now, if it seemed like I went through a lot of stuff, it's because this is just a YouTube video. I could spend literally hours, if not dozens of hours, talking about any one of these things: recording, editing, batch processing. That was just 4 samples. What if you needed to edit 40,000 samples or 400,000 samples? Mapping, creating contact patches. There's so much to discuss with this stuff. Can't possibly fit into one video. Now, if you want to go beyond the scope of a YouTube video and really learn this process more in depth from start to finish, even if you you have no experience using Contact or creating samples or anything like that, I'm going to be launching a course on exactly that goes in depth on how to create your own sample libraries and virtual instruments. Basically, I'm going to cover everything from the pre-production and planning, how to pick the right sounds and get the most out of your session, to recording, editing, organization, and then creating patches. Basically, a lot of what you saw in this video, but really expanded out into several hours worth of content. If that sounds like something you might be interested in, check the video description. Otherwise, I hope you go out and make your own custom sounds and that you realize you really don't need much of anything at all. Just a single mic and any kind of cool sound will do. That's all you need to get started. All right, this has been Andrew Aversa. I will see you next time.